introduction and background to the project proposal. In our project, in a group of 3, we are researching if a podcast idea is feasible and workable at Middlesex University, London. Our objective in this project would be to find and compare information about the podcast. Who and where are listening to a business podcast? We are going to research how many entrepreneurship podcasts are already existing with similar content and in what area our podcast can be explored that other people are not exploring. To collect the data around the background of the podcast, how it works and how to increase the number of listeners. What is the purpose of the podcast? How to podcast background looks in the UK. We will focus on all information collected. Then we will be able to see if the business podcast is one of the ones which is worth it to focus on. When we look on the podcast market for news or information, the podcast market is one of the newest ones. It's important to check the statistics like the age of people to who we would like to present the podcast. Research can help us to reach the goal, a business podcast. We have chosen the podcast because now is one of the most accessible ways to gain the biggest audience. In a time when all people live in the rush, podcasts can be an easy and accessible way of communication. In the end, we would like to create a podcast that will fit our university frames. According to BBC News, they suggest that podcast is an edited piece of content which will be a complete radio program, an edited extract or highlights from a program. Small business entrepreneurship. The small entrepreneurship podcast would be about a small business in which you are your own boss. It has higher risks for personal purposes, typically hiring all local employees because of costs, mainly business conducted by small business entrepreneurship is about retail, real estate, and trade services. Social entrepreneurship. The small entrepreneurship podcast would be about making a difference in a community or not caring for profit as much as caring for everything else. Innovate entrepreneurship. Innovate entrepreneurship is about taking ideas and making or turning them into a business project. Also, it aims to change the way people live for the better and to keep motivating and being passionate.
Now I'm gonna talk about project timeline, which includes Gantt chart in your appendix. We have created a Gantt chart which keeps our progress at work. It will include all the main points of our project, dates and milestones, the start data of the project, the completion status, and our project key points. All starts of the process have been discussed in the group and divided to complete the project proposal on time. It will help us keep the deadlines and stick to the time provided. As a group, we have discussed and agreed with all evidence, resources and data. All dates and tasks which are provided in the Gantt chart will help us to complete tasks on time. Gantt chart can show the whole way which we want through now. From the searching of ideas to the point when we are a group, we are setting up the dates and main points of our project. In the second one, I will talk about methodology for our proposed research. The first thing we have started to research is the information about podcast and what does it mean. Then we have started the process of our research topic, which is entrepreneurship. Then we had to see what entrepreneurship is and how can it be implemented into the podcast. When we have started collecting all information, we tried to divide them into two main groups: primary and secondary data. Primary data lacks personal interviews, observation and surveys give us information about the people, which we don't gonna do, thinking about it. As a part of the project, it's quite important to check who will be your audience. The second group will be secondary data. It includes all past data resources like journals, publication and books, which we're gonna do. The importance of having multi-source of information is to create a good background of resources. More examples from different sources will help us to check out and establish our main project points. Then we have examined the area of Middlesex and how many podcasts are already existing in the area. After that, we research if the podcast is feasible in Middlesex University and how big of an audience we can acquire after all the research is made. We are going to put our research and process into action of creating entrepreneurship podcast.
Okay, and on the end, we would like to just talk about how we're gonna put everything together. The project and all research completed during this time show us how strong and big potential can have a podcast. Podcasts can be run on most electronic devices in all places in the world. Most of the people in the UK have the basic equipment to create and listen to podcasts. During the 21st century, the podcast can be one of the most accessible business transmitter. It can reach most of the age groups and can be used easily wherever we are. It may be a perfect in our university. The research shows that the business can share more information about the business and raise awareness about the business and the company. The podcast might give other people a reason to talk about it, can move the news, inspire people, and help create new ideas which might be development in the future, business or development the current one. The ideas and creativity can develop faster, and project and business involved might develop in much faster way. Of course, based on the statistic, podcast is not the best way for all ages groups. The hardest people to reach might be the oldest group between 56 years old and over. But the time is changed, and every year we can see an increase in all age groups. Our main purpose when we create the podcast is to create the entrepreneurship business podcast that will be successful in our Middlesex University. The statistics show the age of our students is perfect for this kind of the transmission. We can use University Hub to upload and share the podcast with other students. And on the end of our researches as a whole group, we can clearly say that entrepreneurship business podcast can be feasible on our university, Middlesex, London